hormonal or what would that be, endocrine issues resulting. But what did manifest that we could see is that I did not have teenage acne. I had open sores all over my chest, shoulders, and back. My skin, but they weren't even sores. They were actually fissures that opened up, as if the cellular metabolism didn't heal after I had been age progressed and regressed.
Quickly, Alfred, what do you mean by they are off limits, referring to the GI?
Well, those were Michael Ralph's words, and I've never been in the U.S. Armed Forces, and I think, Ken and others may. But I think if you're a member of the security staff, if someone's off limits, you cannot fraternize with them. Is that the case or something like that? Yeah. Okay. So now, just go back here. So now, so we're now going to transition to the documentary evidence for indigenous life on Mars. And Andy will be going into that in depth. And here we're just providing 3 or 4 introductory threshold level photographs, again, that Andy has discovered, as I would say, one of the leading, if not the leading, scientific explorer of this era by bringing it into mainstream science of new species and of life on a neighboring planet. And so I present these here with great pleasure as a fellow officer and member of the Mars Anomaly Research Society, which is at projectmars.net. And so Andy will be telling you much more about that on Thursday. But the documentary evidence for indigenous life on Mars includes a number of photographs from the Mars rovers. And what we've done here is to select one of the photos, perhaps one of the more classic ones, called PIA 10214, which was taken on November of 2007 on the Columbia Plateau, Gusev Crater, Mars, and was placed online by NASA in January of 2008. It's about the latitude of what Columbus, Ohio would be like on Mars. On Earth, excuse me, I'm kidding. A little mixed up here. And embedded in NASA PIA 10214 are images of humanoid species of animals, structures, and statues on the surface of Mars. And at projectmars.net, there's the great paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars by Andrew Bashago, which you can download there. It's also at exopolitics.com, and along with about 60 other papers that contain analysis and images of the various life and other evidences, both of contemporary life, intelligent life, and ancient, by that means pre-cataclysm, life on Mars. An average of about 75%, I'm not sure if that's too generous or not, but the audience says that it is more likely than not that there are species of humanoids and animals on Mars from recognizing them embedded in this photograph. And we'll be seeing 2 or 3 of the images now. And why not a higher percentage? Because NASA interferes with 7 sophisticated techniques to hide the pictures of human figures, animals, structures, and statues, i.e. there's a double game going on. Oh, here's all the pictures, and embedded in them are these techniques to make it more difficult to find the images embedded in them. And one can go in more in depth at the Project Mars website and download papers, for example, that would go more in depth as to exactly how scale, contrast, color, skewing, consistency, integrity, and content are manipulated by NASA so as to make it very difficult for the constitutional government and the civilian population of the world, the Earthlings, to see that there's life on the neighboring planet, even though that's their task to do that and funded to do that. And so this is the first image, and I know that Andy will go into this in a great deal of depth. So I'm just going to go into this one very, very briefly. And this is sort of very famous image now that was placed online around January of 2008 that is embedded in the PIA 10-14, this appears like a woman, correct? Or can people see that? And Andy will be showing, and so I'm just going to go very briefly that if you see down here, it appears that this is a statue, and the male part of the statue has broken off. Can you see that there? So the male part of the statue?
Oh, that part, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. There's a tremendous amount more hidden in this, but I'm going to leave that till the Thursday night presentation. So you can see how many layers and how many ages are embedded in this statuary. In other words, this statuary raises issues of Mesoamerican statuary, I think, with the Quetzalcoatl plumaged serpent theme. But we won't go into that now. We'll go into it Thursday. This is, I think, the classical figure, the first photograph or image of a non-earthling humanoid on another planet that humans have historically seen. And this is from the rock enclosure on Sokolsky Ridge, Columbia Basin on Mars. And as you can see, these are sort of rocks here that make kind of a rock enclosure. Can people see that? And then sort of leaning with his back to the camera and his back is to the camera and his head is facing out, is a very slender Martian humanoid in blue turquoise pants and kind of a beige upper. Can people see that?
Alfred, that's somewhat of a degraded image on the
Yeah, it is.
There are two sides that cut through the
Yeah.
ET-like Martian who has his back to us and
Right.
is leaning over the rock.
Right, it is.
Cuts to his body there.
Let me see if this image is better. Here is
That's actually bifurcated too as well. So
Yeah.
I have better quality images.
oh, okay, good. So let's go to these. Now, this is the figure of an insect-human hybrid, the scorpion man. And I think if you could come down here to the corner, here you see the body of the scorpion man in the turquoise color with the head there. Can you see that?
And smaller beings standing behind him,
Yeah.
perhaps his progeny. And,
Right.
and a smaller scorpion woman or other scorpion man in front of him.
Right,
With
here.
a bulbous head.
Here.
In other words, the head and the torso is on the right, at the right extremity, and then
Right,
extension,
the
thorax or whatever.
torso's here
Yeah,
and the head's along here.
yeah.
Could that be anything from Atlantean technology where they made hybrids like
Well, it's interesting that figures featuring the head and shoulders of a human being both male and female, and the lower extremities of a scorpion appear in the High Egyptian panthology. The goddess Serket was a hybrid between, pantheon I meant to say. The goddess Serket is featured the head and shoulders of a woman and the body of a scorpion. So we have to ask, did Martian creatures enter the High Egyptian civilization via cultural diffusion and become the gods and goddesses of the Egyptian iconography that we see in the hieroglyphs and so forth? Or were these hybridized products of genetic engineering by the High Egyptian civilization on Mars? We don't really know. All we know is that we have found artifacts that prove the presence of the High Egyptian civilization on Mars. I'll be showing one of those, the face of a pharaoh carved into a rock on Mars. And we find Martian animals in the Egyptian pantheon. So they both link up, both culturally and biologically, demonstrating the connection in antiquity between ancient Egypt and ancient Mars.
And here, this is from the classic paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars. And one of the categories of animal species combines the elements of species that inhabit Earth at this time and that are hybrids of living animal species, so that here there's an animal that looks like it's terrestrial rather than aquatic, but it looks like it has the body of an octopus. Does that come across to people? Can people see that?
It actually has a large face like the head of a dog or a walrus, and then these appendages, and it's coming towards the camera in the nature of a terrestrial octopus.
Yeah, Ken.
Okay, what is NASA's excuse? Are they saying these are weathered rock formations or lava outcrops, but is there any evidence of lava, volcanic, production in that area? So, I mean, if you were to say this is a geological formation, well, what type of geology are people giving the excuse of that be?
Well, I think that NASA is a disinformation agency when it comes to life on Mars. And so it's not even worthwhile looking at, they just released, with regard to this recent alleged structure on Mars, they even denied that the face on Mars was an artificial body. Yes?
This is supposed to be the living thing itself, right?
Yeah. So it's really a living terrestrial octopus-like creature with the face of a dog or lion or something like that. This is a category of Martian species called the plesiosaur, and which did not survive the KT event on Earth, except for possibly Nessie and the Loch Ness Monster, Lake Champlain, and in Lake Okanagan. And here we can see the bulky body and the long neck of the plesiosaur. Here it's sort of, and in different postures, and this is a deceased one.
The one in the center, if I might provide some color.
Yeah.
The creature that chased Courtney Hunt and I during my second trip up in August of 1981 was virtually identical to the creature in the center photograph. When we were walking back to the skull that marked the access point to underground civilization, I looked over and I thought it was just a boulder. And then I saw some movement, and I saw this sort of cobra-like head come up on the long neck.
Wow.
As you see in the center image, where you have this boulder-like body, and the creature's turning its sort of E.T.-like head, E.T. in the feature film, to the back and to the right and looking over there. And then I noted that to Hunt, and I said, well, that's an animal, isn't it? And he then, very gingerly told me that at the count of 10, we should run towards and jump through it. But as we began running, this creature started
Wow.
perambulating across the surface and actually smacked itself against the face of the skull as we got safely inside and scampered down the steps. And I said, "Is that a carnivore?" And he said, "Hell yes, that thing has teeth running all the way down its throat." So these are not only predators on the surface of Mars, they are carnivores. And these were among the types of creatures that Brett Stillings and I and the others attending that class were trained to always scan our environment every 30 seconds because we were there to be seen and not eaten. So these are actually predators on the surface of Mars.
So, and this is our logo at Project Mars, and I would urge those of you, you can go to Project Mars again and download over 60 papers for free, which are historic papers of life on the neighboring planet. And those of you who would want to become more involved in the work of Project Mars, you can contact Andy or myself, and there's ways to contact us by email. Also, I'm sorry? Yeah, and there's a Project Mars group on Facebook also. It's called the Mars Anomaly Research Society Mars. So you can join that, and there's a lively. And we're gearing up to become more active and are preparing various documents like treaties regarding Mars and preparing to enter this vacuum, which is a very serious one. And so here we have our Mars mascot. Now, how many people can recognize what animal is the mascot of the Mars Anomaly Research Society? Yeah. Yes.
Technical going to plesiosaurs and Ware were all marine or waterborne.
I'm sorry, I can't hear
They're
you.
all waterborne, all the ones I knew of.
Yeah, no, it was aquatic on Earth, but it's terrestrial on Mars.
But it still has flippers.
I'm sorry?
It has flippers.
No, it has legs, but we're provisionally calling it a plesiosaur.
Yeah, that's just a reference to what it resembles in Earth
Oh,
Yeah.
biological
Yeah.
history. It's not,
Okay, is there anyone here that cannot recognize the plesiosaur, cannot see the plesiosaur? How many can see the plesiosaur? Raise your hands.
It is like flat with the head, right?
Yeah, hold your hands up. Just want to see.
yeah, that's why we selected it as the animal for.
So that's about 60% of the room, I think.
Well, do we have any names? Can anybody not see that as a turtle-like animal with a long neck, with the head of a snake or a horse, small horse-like head? Can anybody not see that?
I can't see it.
Yeah,
Alfred, you want to
You know, please do.
it's looking to its own left, it looks like.
This is kind of overexposed. I mean,
Yeah,
I extracted the image from a NASA JPEG, a full resolution JPEG, and then I dropped it into a Word document and made it PDF, and now we're looking at it over illuminated with this kind of projection
Yeah.
system. But the reason we selected it as the animal for our logo for the Mars Anomaly Research Society, which by the way is at Mars Anomaly Research Society group on Facebook, is because when you can see it in a better resolved way, you basically see the body of a tortoise with a tail, and then a long snake-like neck and the small horse-like head that has been reported in the Lake Monster Mysteries on Earth. And there was an aquatic species on Earth prior to the KT extinction, a reptile species, not a dinosaur, called Plesiosaurus, and that's why we selected it, because I don't believe an animal with a tortoise-like body, a tail, a neck, and a head can be described as a rock. So I think we had almost 100% agreeing that they see a creature up there rather than an accidental rock formation, although we have a couple of individuals indicate they can't see it. So I would say 90% or 95 in this gathering,
Which
Deep
means,
down
And see.
the throat.
so as you, if you were to stand next to that creature, how big would you be?
Before it ate you.
Carnivores?
You just stood next to it.
It would be big enough to run from it, and small enough to be lunch to it.
Yeah. Okay, but bite size
That
or,
would be about the, if I were standing next to that, that would be about the size of a pony.
but the what?
Pony.
Oh, well, okay, like in other words, a tail, right?
Yeah.
Would you be as tall as the tail?
Well, these are life forms, so they can be juvenile creatures or fully formed, whatever. Their size reference to human. In other words, when we were walking past the boulder, it wasn't a huge animal. It was a boulder like the size of this table, and then the head came up. But it moved on, it closed on us very fast.
The Quetzalcoatl thing was bigger though, if that outline looked.
Oh, that Quetzalcoatl image is a rock carving. That's, the first image was of a statue.
Oh, so the animal itself is not like the size of this room. Okay, so the size
No,
of the animal.
although I will be showing you the image of the striding gremlin, who, if we size reference the size of the man at 6 feet, he's holding his arms, is about 25 feet tall. So we were being trained to look around every 30 seconds. And in fact, Brett remembers me taking it to task for not looking around every 30 seconds to scan the environment for predators.
So when you say it's the size of a horse, that's what it is, the size of a horse.
Well,
A pony.
we know that NASA said that Tsiolkovsky Ridge is 100 feet across. So this could be a baby. This one in this image could be 10 inches across. Just like you could have a baby tortoise and then a 100-year-old tortoise that's much larger. But they're not gargantuan compared to our size.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
good, thanks.
You know. So, what are the implications that can be reasonably deduced from witness and documentary evidence? Namely, that it is more probable than not that Mars is an inhabited planet with a third dimension, humanoid extraterrestrial civilization living in underground cities as well as on the surface of Mars. Mars is inhabited by humanoid beings like and unlike us, and by animals that are like those that exist on Earth at this time, that once existed on Earth in prehistoric times, or that are hybrids with traits of two or more Earth species. I should say that these are conclusions that are set out in the classic paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, by Andrew Rishago. And Mars indigenous animal species include human insects hybrids and human lizard hybrids that do not exist on Earth, and that to our knowledge have never existed on Earth, such as the scorpion man. And that's just a selection of the humanoid in the rock enclosure by Tsiolkovsky Ridge at the top, of a Martian plesiosaur in the center, and of the scorpion man at the bottom. So this concludes our section on third-dimensional solar system civilizations as part of the dimension-based typology of extraterrestrial civilizations in the task of providing supportive evidence for the dimensional ecology of the multiverse hypothesis. Okay, well, I'll be just catching up now. We've finished the third dimension, solar system civilizations, and we've presented evidence which supports the dimensional ecology hypothesis that we live in a multiverse in which intelligent civilizations enjoy a dimensional ecology, and they use teleportation, the 8 modes or more, as Andy has defined them, of getting around, including out-of-body experiences. So now we'll be going to explore the evidence of hyperdimensional civilizations. And that, by hyperdimensional, I'm just using a term to apply to dimensions above and beyond the dimension of time-space that we're inhabiting at the moment. And so there's no place like home. This is evidence of a hyperdimensional civilization from Vancouver, BC. And this is an intention experiment that we conducted with John Kelly, who's a UFO and extraterrestrial experimenter and expert that lives in Vancouver. And it was conducted by John and myself and my much better other half, Dr. Jerry DeStefano Weber, who had wished she could have been here but had other obligations. She's my wife that lives in Vancouver. She's a psychic and a psychotherapist combined. And the person that you see there is Mariana Ridwald, who is a very accomplished painter and artist who lives on Maui and who is one of the artists very closely associated with the Dalai Lama. She's a Tibetan Buddhist and she's painted the Dalai Lama. And she's a personal friend of ours and was visiting Vancouver. So we all went out to the beach there and we started an intention experiment to bring in interdimensional extraterrestrial spacecraft or space probes. And you can see that light to the left there is the evidence of the space probe that came in, and we distinguished it from part of the meteor shower that was occurring at that time. And so my point in putting this there is that I'm sure that here in Kona you all engage in sky watches and in intention experiments. I mean, there's more of the underwater extraterrestrial encounters here with the dolphins and the cetaceans and that sort of thing, perhaps the extraterrestrial underground bases. So that is documentary evidence of the existence of hyperdimensional intelligent civilizations accessing this dimension. And these are some more documentary evidence. Hyperdimensional civilizations are based in dimensions or universes parallel or encompassing our own dimension and may use technologically advanced physical form and or transport when entering our known dimension or universe. And they may be located in upper dimensions in our own solar system, our Milky Way galaxy or other galaxies, or in dimensions or universes parallel to or encompassing our own third dimension. And these are photographs of two of the such interdimensional interdimensional UFO encounters at 2010. You can see that they take on certain archetypal forms. This was at Mount Adams, Washington. And during one of the intention experiments I was there, there were about 200 people in a circle. And it's about 7 o'clock at night, and Mount Washington was in the, Mount Adams was in the distance. And so we all established the intention to call in interdimensional craft. And soon I was facing Mount Adams in the circle, and soon a very large craft appeared to my left and hovered down this way and hovered right in front of the circle about maybe 2/3 of the way between ourselves and Mount Adams. And based on the measurements, it may have been a kilometer across. And it began to communicate with, I began to receive this telepathic signal saying, well, maybe you'll come aboard. And I went, go. Okay. And, you know, eventually it kind of wandered off, but I checked the next day with people who were outside of the conference building, and they had the same thought. So, I don't know. I think that my judgment is that those are not these particular instances that happened that night were not terrestrial craft for a variety of reasons that I'll explain. For example, this is another photograph of an interdimensional UFO outside of the conference building that occurred right after we did a laughter meditation inside the conference hall. And the UFO was photographed outside, and that colored circle is a photograph of it. Well, during these exercises, we had chemtrail planes lay literally 12 layers of chemtrails over the conference hall so as to damp down our consciousness and all the conscious waves that we were sending out. And so I think that the national security state, or whoever is behind the chemtrails, there's all sorts of theories, we're actually trying to dampen the experience and our connection with the positive upper dimensional, interdimensional extraterrestrials. So that's more evidence that upper dimensional extraterrestrials exist. So these are photographs, actual photographs of them, of their entering our third dimension through probably through wormholes that they themselves create through artificial technology in order to enter the third dimension. This is another photograph. This is taken by John Kelly of 2009 of an interdimensional UFO entering during the evenings. We go out for and have sky watches, and this is some of the phenomena that would appear during the sky watches. These are some of the interdimensional beings that have been photographed again at Mount Adams. This was photographed by Kan, a Japanese monk. And these are multidimensional feline intelligent beings. They're about 10 feet tall. Can everybody see what looks to be like a feline being? They're about 10 feet tall. So one can have intelligent civilizations that are in feline form and that are as well as in human form. And these may be associated with the hyperdimensional UFOs. And this is another of the images that Kan was able to, he actually, does the intention experiment and asks them to come in. And this is a multidimensional female intelligent being who identified herself as a Pleiadian, perhaps associated with the hyperdimensional UFOs. It was said that many of the hyperdimensional UFOs that appeared during the intention experiments were Pleiadian. So can everyone see that image? She has kind of a Marian archetype.
Hey, Alfred?
Yeah.
We have some photos that we were here during one of the conferences when Mark Macy was here. We have some spirit pictures.
Oh, good.
And both of us had photos with two distinct faces over ours. And so I photoshopped them together so you can see an Arcturian, a Pleiadian lion cat being, and a couple of others. So if anyone
Exactly.
wants to see them, I'll put them
Oh,
on.
yeah, great. Would like to very much. So, yeah, so we have the ability through intention experiments, which you can engage in yourselves, to go into a non-local place and begin to access these intelligent beings that are interdimensional, that represent interdimensional civilizations that are in an exopolitical relationship with us and that are supportive to our evolution as conscious beings. Now, here is a classic photo of some of the events that Andy was referring to in his lecture last night. And this is the classic photo of hyperdimensional UFOs that appeared over the US Capitol in July 1952. And below is exactly 50 years later. This is a July 26, 2002, a hyperdimensional UFO extraterrestrial craft being chased by two F-16 fighters in Maryland. And that's the photograph of the hyperdimensional craft, which is moving like this. And we don't have the photograph of the F-16s, but they're in hot pursuit. And I mentioned Will Allen earlier. He believes that the hyperdimensional civilization behind UFO overflights and landings in the U.S. Capitol is gray ETs and human hybrid. Now, whether or not they are Orion Grays, which will show some data suggesting that there may be an alliance between some factions of the Draco Reptilians and of the Orion Grays that are engaged in an attempted occupation of the solar system and of planet Earth. Mr. Allen says that during a recent abduction experience, he was surrounded by gray ETs. He says that he has a gray ET implant to go to various locations in which he's instructed to photograph extraterrestrial craft and personnel that enter the P-56 restricted Capitol Hill airspace through interdimensional stargates at extremely high speeds. In other words, the Capitol and the Washington Monument and the White House are all part of a highly restricted airspace. And he has reported these landings to the U.S. Capitol Police. The Capitol Police, in turn, have leaked out a number of landings that are continuing to occur on the Capitol, on the U.S. government buildings around the Capitol, etc. And according to Mr. Allen, it's the same entities and the same civilization that is behind the July 26, 2002, the photograph at the bottom, which was chased by two F-16 fighters. And in the 1952 hyperdimensional flight over the U.S. Capitol, which was on the front pages of newspapers throughout the world and which resulted in Andy's father being deployed to develop the ramjet engine, Sabre jets were also deployed after to chase down, and two of them were shot down. And so it may be that these are the Orion Gray faction, which is a very tricky faction, as we'll learn. What happened, and this gets into all of the business of the extraterrestrial embargo since 1952, is that the CIA convened a panel in the aftermath of the overflights of the U.S. Capitol. That's another classic photo of the hyperdimensional flyover 1952. And they said, quote, "The extremely high numbers of UFO reports in 1952 disturbed both the Air Force and the Central Intelligence Agency. Both groups felt that an enemy nation could deliberately flood the U.S. with false UFO reports, causing mass panic and allowing them to launch a sneak attack. And so in September 54, in 1952, the Office of Scientific Intelligence of the CIA issued a report stating that the flying saucer situation has national security implications and may touch off mass hysteria and panic. And the result of the Robertson panel, that essentially implemented the extraterrestrial embargo which we've lived under since 1953. And that is that any time that UFOs or extraterrestrials were mentioned in government, in science, in education, in media, anywhere in civic society, they had to be accompanied by ridicule. And so that is the condition that the public has existed under since 1953. Now, you can say that that would be for a couple, that the effects of that can be read in a number of different ways. As we're trying to puzzle through exactly what is the relationship of the Orion Grays and because we'll see that there are other types of grays, of the Orion Grays to the U.S. government, a very significant whistleblower is Jim Sparks, who comes forward. I've interviewed him. I've written a review of his book, which he published on as part of the second edition of his book. And he essentially was an 18-year participant in the gray and human hybrid abduction program of the Greys. I won't say Orion Greys, I'll just say Greys. And he was like what would be a trustee in a prison. In other words, his job, they would abduct him, and his job was to really to calm down the first-timers that were being brought up there. And there was, these were for the purposes of intrusive medical procedures related to the hybridization program, which may itself be a cover for another more deeper and disturbing aspect. But he reports that in a number of cases, he was teleported into Gray T craft, and along with a number of other, whoever else, the people that were being taken up into there, and then they were teleported from the Gray T craft into a U.S. Armed Forces base where the abductees were processed by U.S. Armed Forces personnel. So there's a literature of, some call it MILABs, some call it military abductions. Mr. Sparks seems to have identified an area that is not so much the military mimicking gray abductions of humans, but rather there being an operational interface between the Greys in terms of abductions and intrusive operations, the use of women, human women without consent to being wombs for hybrids. Now, the whole issue of informed consent is central to our notion of civil liberties and constitutional rights. So we'll be getting onto later some of the secret treaties transfer to the U.S. government in return for the permission granted to conduct human abductions, which the government would allow, but of course the civilians involved were not consenting parties to these. As we shall see, even those treaties were misleading in the sense that the Greys, who were apparently fronting for the Draco reptilians, who are very aggressive species, soon began to expand their abductions and other operations way beyond the terms of the treaty. And the treaties, according to a reliable whistleblower, were renewed every 10 years, that is 34, 44, etc. This gets into the issue of extraterrestrial governance bodies, and by an extraterrestrial governance body, we mean the legally constituted extraterrestrial authorities with jurisdiction over a defined territory, such as the Milky Way Galactic Federation, which has been empirically located in replicable research. The jurisdiction of extraterrestrial governance authorities, by available evidence, may extend across dimensions within a single galaxy such as our own. And the essential structure and dynamics of the exopolitics model, that the universe is populated by intelligent civilizations organized under governing bodies and operating according to law, is preliminarily confirmed by replicable scientific remote viewing data developed during the 1990s. These suggest that a spiritually and technologically advanced galactic federation of worlds exists, and it can be loosely described, as a loosely organized spiritual government of our Milky Way galaxy. And for people who want to get into these sort of primers of how exopolitics as a science and a political science develops, you can explore that in my book, Exopolitics. In order to understand what governance of humans means, we have to understand what human beings are all about. And some evidence suggests that we were in our design, an extraordinary light-based entity, and a member of the light-based upper dimensional civilizations like the Pleiadians and the Alpha Centaurians and the Syrians, that we're a product of these civilizations and not a product of the Greys. That the Greys are interlopers and manipulating our DNA for their purposes. And that the Greys may be bending the rules of non-interference with their abduction programs, which were sanctioned by entities like the Roosevelt administration, followed in 1941 by the Third Reich, for geopolitical reasons that had to do with earthly power plays and not with the more advanced universal laws under which advanced civilizations operate. One version, which has a lot of congruency to it, is that a network of advanced, intelligent, upper-dimensional, extraterrestrial, and interdimensional civilizations, including the Pleiadians and Syrians, originally developed Homo sapiens as third-dimension light beings, an intelligent being with 12-strand DNA, and a species that was to have been a guardian of the third dimension of time-space in our dimensional ecology on Earth. We now know, to quote the Human Genome Project, a group of researchers working at the Human Genome Project indicate that they have made an astonishing scientific discovery. They believe so-called 97% non-coding sequences in human DNA is no less than the genetic code of extraterrestrial life forms. The non-coding sequences are common to all living organisms on Earth, from moles to fishes to humans. In human DNA, they constitute the larger part of the total genome. In other words, now we have projects that are mapping the human genome that say that 90%, 97% of our DNA appears to be extraterrestrial, which is congruent with the initial assertion that we were designed before various incursions, initially by the Anunnaki, who we can describe as the inhabitants of a planet known in our mythology as Planet X, or Nibiru, which is a planet, an unascended planet of an ascended sun in the Sirius star system. And so it's kind of a clinker out there in space that comes into our solar system every 3,600 years. It's next expected in the year 3,600. And its inhabitants, according to this version that some scholars have researched from the Sumerian tablets, their initial incursion into planet Earth was about 500,000 BC, and they discovered us as a paradise planet and said, oh, this is great, because we're kind of circling out there in space, and they have a very negative view of themselves because they were left behind by their solar system. So around 97,000 BC, according to this version, which I don't have external confirmation of, but just congruent statements from scientific organizations like this, the Anunnaki, began to interfere with the independent Homo sapiens project that had been initiated on this planet as well by the Pleiadian Syrian group to develop Homo sapiens as a 12-strand DNA. And their interference resulted in our being downgraded to 2-strand DNA to be kind of a consciousness slave race. Well, we are now regaining that and regaining our 3rd strand. And, you know, some of the new crystal kids are being born in with 6 strands, and we're starting to regain our 12-strand process. And if you look at the pineal gland, right in the center, if you take just go this way and make an X in your head, right in the middle, you'll find the pineal gland. That's kind of the processor for the 12-strand DNA, and it's capable of processing all of the signals that go in and out, and that's the main sort of the engine of our consciousness. And so now we're in programs that are recapacitating us as a 12-strand DNA. But that's sort of a quick overview of one plausible exopolitical version of our past. And we've called for a decade of contact, which is open resources to discover what our real nature is, which is now being held hostage by a lot of this information not being made available to public researchers. That really just summarizes some of the what the interference of the Anunnaki was. Their view was that they had found us and kind of settled here, chosen us as a colony in 500 BC and as an outpost, and that they had rights to interfere with the Homo sapiens project, although legally speaking they didn't have it because they were engaged in intervention, in contravention of the non-intervention policy. So that's a different intervention than the intervention which is currently occurring, which is more acute, which is the intervention by the Greys and by the Orion Grey and Draco Reptilian faction, which have directly contracted with nation states and factions on the Earth starting in 1934. Now, these are some of the models that, or information that recent whistleblowers, notably Michael Prince, his adopted name was James Casbolt, the family that he was adopted into. He's a super soldier. He's a test tube baby with extraterrestrial DNA, who then was inserted in the womb of an Illuminati aristocratic mother. And when the baby was born, he was taken as a group of 42 babies to an underground base in Nelson, BC, for trauma-based mind control to become an assassin on behalf of the New World Order, or on behalf, the New World Order is the political expression of the Orion Gray Draco occupation. And I live in Vancouver, BC, which is not far from Nelson, BC. I've been to Nelson, and I developed contact with a person who in the 1970s framework had frequent interaction with high-level representatives of a Nazi network that operated an underground base at Murphy Lake, also known as Eagle Lake, in BC, which is northwest of Nelson. And what Michael Prince describes is that at this underground base, the officers there wore black SS, Nazi SS uniforms with the SS insignia, and that they were 42 babies that then, to a certain age, were mind control through trauma-based mind control. It's very, very awful stuff. You know, they would take one of them and throw them to wild animals to be eaten right in front of the other group, and it's really just terrible stuff. And the trauma-based mind control, which is now prevalent both in the UK and in the US, national security apparatus, to which Andy's been subjected, Laura's been subjected, the MK Ultra programs, myself, just the COINTELPRO, that essentially is Orion Gray extraterrestrial mind control technology that was downloaded through the 1941 treaty into the Nazis, probably through the 1934 treaty into the Roosevelt administration as well, and then brought over under Project Paperclip and propagated most extensively throughout the U.S., starting with the George H.W. Bush administration, who I called the global mind control president, because that's one of his gifts to us from the Gray civilization, in my humble opinion, because it was under him that the mind control programs really went very, very public, and people began to get zapped in public places. You had, ELF generators in courts, and you go by a squad car and they'd zap you, and it's a mess. So what Michael Prince has said is that by 1964, according to his information, U.S. intelligence believed that the Orion Grays and the Draco reptilians had timetabled this planet for invasion and takeover between the years 3000 and 2030. And he identifies what's called the military-industrial extraterrestrial complex. In other words, that is those networks which are controlled, if you trace them up, by the Gray and reptilian faction, either through mind control or through cloning. The Grays have developed and perfected cloning, human cloning, and also the technology of enmeshing human souls into clones. So that it's a functioning, it's kind of, the upper tiers of the human army of occupation in service of the gray reptilian occupation. Some of them are under mind control, some of them are actual clones, which are gray clones with souls that they've technologized in, who sort of follow the orders. I was told that, for example, Piers Morgan, who is a media personality on CNN that took over from Larry King, who's a real human, is actually a clone. And he's a guy who called me an idiot and a crackpot on CNN national television because I had, standing with Governor Jesse Ventura on the 9th Ward levee in New Orleans, which had been blown up deliberately by a contractor of the Army Corps of Engineers in order to destroy New Orleans. This had nothing to do with the hurricane. This was a black ops. We were standing right in front of this destroyed 9th Ward. And my family goes back to the late 1600s in New Orleans and in the Louisiana area. So I know a little bit about that particular area. So this was deliberate genocide and ecocide. And I mentioned in the interview that based on a certain researcher's 30-page paper, the multi-generational intelligence relationship of President Barack Obama, that he comes from a third-generation CIA family. And it was that segment that Piers Morgan aired on CNN. So I didn't appreciate me calling it idiot and a crackpot on CNN. I thought it was like another dirty trick. I called up the president and general counsel of Turner Broadcasting and got her on the phone, and we did a whole legal thing back and forth. And then a colleague of mine wrote me and said, Alfred, don't bother. He's not a human. And that's how, in other words, a certain proportion of opinion leaders are actually clones. So if someone looks very artificial, it's in the area of subjective research and not objective research. But you might want to take a look at that. What Mr. Prince says, and he has been wanting to come on a joint broadcast with Andy and Laura and myself, but he wrote recently that since he did this latest broadcast, it's too precarious for him, and he might do it in the near future. But he has said that an ET false flag operation is planned, and that the entity is referred to as the military-industrial extraterrestrial complex, which I thought was a very expressive term. That really expresses what, they've kept the extraterrestrial component out.
Can you repeat that? The name?
The military-industrial extraterrestrial complex, MIEC. I think that so much energy has been put into keeping the extraterrestrial component out. I think that the 1953 Robertson panel was really about not blocking people knowing about the Pleiadians, but blocking people knowing about the Orion Gray and Draco reptilian occupation. That's what I heard. So, Mr. Prince maintains that UK intelligence has studied, the kind of the white hats have studied the survival dynamics of Homo sapiens, and that we have because of the superior survival dynamics of the human species, human society will defeat the hostile extraterrestrial civilizations that consist mainly of a gray and Draco reptilian faction. It's a dangerous situation, however, all is under control and people should not panic. So, which is, sort of There you go. That's a photo of the famous UFO overflights of New York City of October 13th, 2010. Okay, is that false flag, UFOs? The FAA closed down the FAA office for October 13th, so there was no official word. All these UFOs appeared. So are those U.S. black budget UFOs? Are those, false flag holograms? Are those holograms? There you go. I think that's sort of, they're pre-testing the false flag is my kind of guess. Okay, so he says that that's a photograph of the Draco constellation. He says that Orion Gray ET trauma-based mind control system began with a 1934 treaty with the Roosevelt administration, renewed every 10 years, that sustains the military-industrial extraterrestrial complex, and its implementation of a hostile occupation of our planet by an Orion Gray and Draco reptilian faction. The military-industrial extraterrestrial complex is coordinated on the ground by trauma-based mind control and clones with gray implanted souls. Okay, this is pretty far out stuff, but I'm just kind of reporting it like, this is what they're saying, folks. Clones with gray implanted souls. Don't you see that on TV a lot? Isn't that what V's about? What the event is about? Yeah. So I think that they're sort of leaking what the situation is. And includes, okay, this is very controversial. Most probable prominent clones like US President Barack Obama. Now, there are researchers who have isolated at least 2 Barack Obamas. That is, entities who are currently occupying the White House, one of whom has deep scars going down to his neck. And they have 2 different hand sizes. So this is photographic evidence that you have to deal with. And CNN Piers Morgan. Figures heavily involved in the trauma-based mind control, Grey ET, Draco reptilian occupation are centered on the UK throne and aristocracy, Dope Inc., and the Orion-based monetary system centered in the City of London and Wall Street. Not all reptilian extraterrestrials, this is again Michael Prince, are dangerous to the human race. The Draco reptilians are an exception, he writes. Now, this is an individual who has experienced the Draco reptilians, who do not make themselves known to us, the surface population. And I think he's a credible whistleblower. And so he writes, the malevolent Dracos are not pleasant. There may be compassionate beings among there, but there's a large section of them that are thoroughly evil and dangerous. The word evil is, again, a subjective term. This worrying news is balanced out by the fact that there are also many benevolent entities from various star systems who are here to help us and have been involved in an ancient war with the Dracos. So this is Star Wars. This is deep exopolitics, right? The Dracos are omnivores and move across planets like locusts for the natural resources, including food, which in this case is us. Where have we heard that before? There will be huge supporting evidence, well, in his book, the Dracos have 2 hearts, are between 7 and 12 feet tall, have the strength of 8 to 12 men, they are hard to kill, have psychic and technological skills in battle that are thousands of years ahead of us, they're cold-blooded and have no remorse or compassion. So he demonizes them, right? But I think he's reporting from his experience, which is as a whistleblower from the UK super soldier world. Now, the good news. The good news is that humanity has treaties with the Galactic Confederation of Worlds, that the US government knows of the existence of at least 118 extraterrestrial races that are involved with the affairs of Earth, There have also been human ET treaties with these compassionate races, and their motivations and actions seem to prove their intentions. The benevolent ETs visiting this planet from star sectors such as the Pleiades, Andromeda, Lyra, Tau Ceti, Sirius A, and Ummo, which have been referred to by contactees and Secret Service personnel as a galactic confederation of worlds. I've interviewed a gentleman, Jerry Wills, who presents himself as, and I perceive him as, and have deep connections who've been friends of his and working associates of his for 20 years, that he was brought here as a baby from Tau Ceti as part of a project from the Galactic Confederation of Worlds, and that these infants were placed here to kind of leaven the human fabric. So there's all this positive stuff going on. And he says that there are benevolent factions within the Orion Grays and the Draco Reptilians, and then he says there are evil factions within the Pleiadians. I don't know what evil means in his terminology, but I'm just reporting that. And that's a photograph of the Pleiadian star system. He goes on to describe something that on the research side, the reporting side, I'm relatively familiar with, and that's the HARP aerosol chemtrails weapon and mind control system. And he says that the military-industrial extraterrestrial complex is currently using a, quote, tablets of destiny supercomputer system that includes the HARP aerosol chemtrails and artificial intelligence mind control system to attempt planetary ecocide and genocide. He states that the Pleiadian fleet is here to liberate humanity and will be successful. And that the Tablets of Destiny is basically a network of large exotic crystal-based computers. And they are linked in a geometrical pattern around the world and can trigger large-scale disasters such as tidal waves, hurricanes, earthquakes. This tidal wave that hit this hotel from Fukushima was generated by the Tablets of Destiny HARP chemtrails weapon system on March 11, 2011. So we have felt it. We're in a place that has felt that. And that's, anyone who's familiar with the subject with the HARP scalar weapon system. And so that's a map of some of the HARP systems around the HARP sites around the planet. We've been able to identify that the Fukushima event, which is now released into the atmosphere 750 terabecquerels, trillion fatal doses of radiation into the atmosphere, and 720 trillion fatal doses of radiation into the oceans, was most plausibly triggered by the Tramo, Norway HARP facility, which was the same HARP facility which generated the blue spiral on the night of November 9th over Oslo, Norway, the night before Barack Obama gave his Nobel Peace Prize war speech, in which he mentioned war over 100 times and never once peace. There you have the confluence that I can attest to from the research and journalistic side and scientific side with what the whistleblowers are saying. There's complete congruence there. Now, I'm moving right along here. Some of the, if we look at the timeline that the Orion Draco Reptilian faction is pursuing, a putative faction, that would be, say, from 2011, supposedly it's going to go really into high gear in January of 2013 after they secured the election of Barack Obama. and that's to morph the United Nations into a one world government, to obliterate national sovereignty, and it'll be under a single world authority, and hence we will be more susceptible to regimentation by the Greys and ultimately by the Draco reptilians, who we shall see are after not so much our bodies for food, but our souls, because they live off of that stuff. And so by their catastrophic timeline, and we don't know if this is going to fulfill itself, their timeline is to move toward creating false flags, which they're doing now, to erase national sovereignty and break down nations. They've been targeting the United States since at least the Vietnam War, which was one of the first targeting to destroy the nation of the United States and to addict its underclass to heroin so that doping, which is centered in the British throne, could take over the U.S., and in which I know as a member of the Vietnam generation, my feeling was that that's when the integrity of the U.S. nation was really rolled out after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And false flags followed in 9/11, Katrina, and Fukushima is the latest ones to break down the civilized countries of the Northern Hemisphere and the intelligent middle class, to destroy it, and to bring about, to morph the United Nations into a one world government, and then to destroy our rights so that we can be more easily colonized and become victims of a gray Draco reptilian occupation. Now, people say, including my dear other half, she says, well, you're just projecting the negative and you're empowering the negative. And I say, no. My purpose here is to identify and to name the predator, because the predator has been so long behind the scenes. So all I'm doing is identifying the predator. I'm not part of that timeline. I'm not going to buy into the one world government and the New World Order, but I'll know what they're doing as an international lawyer as they begin to collapse all of the national structures and begin to create a global superstate in which personal liberties and guaranteed rights are dissolved. And so this, we now begin to see where the confluence of exopolitics and religion once emerges. And there's a religious scholar who says, oh, the truth is that exopolitics was replaced by religion by the Sumerians, and because it was around the time of the Sumerians that human societies prior to that were based on exopolitics. And the extraterrestrials, the manipulative extraterrestrials, created religions in order to enslave our minds. And that's what we'll start to cover in the second half of the presentation tonight, where we'll see how science can now come into areas that are traditionally in the religious realm and begin to liberate us from some of the half-truths and sort of the boxes that religion had put us in about our true cosmic circumstances. And this is just some more of naming the predator. That's the shield of the House of Windsor. The sort of bifurcation or the division into catastrophic and positive timelines. The House of Windsor portrays itself as being both the Lion of Israel and the Lion of England and being part of the house of Judah. And that's setting themselves up to have the lineage to be, quote, king of the world. It's part of this one world government black magic that they've used as part of the Illuminati blood lineage, cum heraldry, cum ceremonial magic, to keep humanity obeying over and over and over to a blood marriage, for example, on April 29th, where the marriage gift to the United States was a heart bombardment with unprecedented tornadoes from the southeast to the southwest, enabling radiation that had been brought over by HAARP weather control to be rained down on the U.S., so that the U.S. and Canada are now radioactive. In Vancouver, we inhale an average of 5 hot particles a day, which is probably what you're doing here in Hawaii from Fukushima. The good news is, and I'll be meeting with Gen Morita from Japan, who had to evacuate from his spiritual center 2 hours north of Tokyo, where he and his wife are. His wife is a very prominent television personality, Yumi Kikuchi, and then they took a 19th century Edo farmhouse and converted it into a spiritual center in Japan. He is now documenting the UFOs over the Fukushima plant, and his belief is that the UFOs are acting to counterbalance the effect of the radiation. Now, I'll be meeting with him Friday at noon, and we hope to go more deeply into that. It's very difficult to justify that position to the third dimension scientists. So, but know that there's good news on the other side of the equation, and that, there's ETs and there's upper dimensionals who may be working to counteract all of this. This again is we had a big debate as to whether to include this. I said, okay, I'll include it in Name the Predator. And the reason why I'm doing it is because I'm a dual Canadian-American citizen. And this gentleman is now starting a nationwide tour in Canada. He's arriving June 30th, and on July 1st is Canada Day, and which is like July 4th here. And the headline in the Ottawa Citizen, which is the newspaper, is Prince to address the masses on Canada Day. So, and then he'll be there for 9 days. He's coming as far as Calgary. They're coming to BC because we know the Windsor's numbers. And then he's coming down for 2 days down to Hollywood. And he's rented a big theater, and they're going to have a thing to BAFTA, which is the British Academy Awards, with the Hollywood royalty. And I was with Shirley MacLaine on Sunday, and I mentioned that to her, and she knew exactly the number that these people are carrying out, which is deception at the spiritual level. This is Prince William, and he's now being set up plausibly as the world king. He's certainly starting his rollout as that in Canada. And this is a very famous picture. It was issued by Buckingham Palace, and it's like his first official picture. So I don't feel bad about this because they're rolling him out as the Antichrist. Buckingham Palace is. You'll notice this is what's called the Prince William Lamb of God. This is called subjective research. So take it or leave it. Prince William as the Lamb of God. Antichrist energy. Antichrist is anything that is against God, Goddess consciousness. Okay? So, he's holding a lamb, and there's a famous portrait of Jesus holding a lamb. Okay? But he's holding the rear cloven hoof of the lamb and bringing it up. And the rear cloven hoof of the lamb, in the symbolism that the Windsors follow, is a Moloch, diabolical symbolism, because they have cloven hoofs. So in this, who is the soul that inhabits that body? That is inheritor of 26% of the landmass of the earth, that owns most of Canada, which is the second largest landmass on the world, the largest uranium exporter, that is exporting uranium, Canadian uranium, into U.S. depleted uranium weapons, U.S., Israeli, and UK depleted uranium weapons, that are reaching the U.S. in 14 days after they're used on the Iraq and Afghanistan battlefields, that account for the diabetes and other epidemics in the U.S. and obesity epidemics is from radiation. And that is behind all the nuclear power plants, including Fukushima, that went off using HAARP and the Stuxnet virus, which is jointly developed by the Mossad and CIA. So, there you have it.
So who
Okay?
is the soul in there?
I'm sorry?
Who is he?
I don't know. But why aren't you suspicious of a person who's now rolling himself out, addressing the masses, after having a blood wedding in which he radiates, is holding up a cloven rear hoof?
What's the blood wedding?
The blood wedding is the royal wedding in London on April 29th. His wedding gift to the U.S. was that they had HAARP bombard the U.S. heartland with record-breaking tornadoes filled with radiation-filled rain, where in World War II the scientists discovered that the most effective atomic weapon was to explode an atomic bomb in a rain cloud, because it would rain down the radiation on all the humans' targets. And that radiation was brought over by HAARP's weather warfare capabilities from Fukushima. So I'm just naming the predator. I'm just making people conscious of what lies there. So we know that there's an intentional universe, right? So we don't want that, right? But that's what that reality is intending.